Hi there, you're listening to More Than Potential. My name is Faith, and I want to talk about Black fathers. Now, I think this is going to be a very controversial post, but I think it's actually necessary. So, some of the things that I'm noticing with a lot of the conversation around Black men as fathers is that they're just not around. You know what I mean? Like when we compare that to how Black women are talked about in terms of Black mothers, there seems to be this very vibrant discourse around what Black women are and are not doing. But like with Black fathers, it's just like not as detailed because we just acknowledge that they're not there. And that's kind of where the conversation stops. You will have people who talk about daddy issues pertaining to Black women, but I don't really see much else happening outside of that. So I kind of wanted to expand a little bit on this in terms of my feelings about, Black fathers and just in general, how we can elevate this conversation to be a bit more productive. So as an entry point, let's revisit Nick Cannon. So Nick Cannon and T.I. are both prominent Black male fathers. And this is not to represent all Black men, but this is a conversation starter, if you will. So they both represent two different types of Black men. So Nick Cannon is like the type of archetypal pro-Black dude who seems to think that his rebellion against the dominant system lies in him producing as many children as possible. Now, before you laugh, consider that there were quite a few Black men. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but there were Black men who had multiple families 30 to 40 years ago. It was not uncommon in the South to find that you had a half brother or sister that lived down the street from you because your daddy was piping another woman. So that was not uncommon. But I think that's what Black men used to do as a way to show their dominance, and in a way, just because they could. They knew that, there weren't enough Black women, and they also knew that Black women were desperate for a man. So some of them took full advantage of that opportunity and created multiple families. I still don't fully understand the psychology behind it, but I think it kind of relates to Nick Cannon and his sort of like weird connection to pro-Blackness. Some of us who have been following Nick Cannon in his career, we remember him from back in the Drumline days. He was like a Black actor who was Black famous. Black people knew who he was. White people probably didn't back in that time. But I will say that over time, as Nick Cannon has gotten older, I've noticed that he, like a lot of other Black men, have become increasingly pro-Black and increasingly using a lot of kind of dangerous rhetoric around how Black people can elevate in this system or maybe dismantle it entirely. And so some of the toxicity lies around his views around women, but also around like legacy. I would not be surprised if Nick Cannon has talked about promoting polygamy. I see that's become a very popular talking point in a certain sect of pro-Black men. And I think it's interesting how these men have interpreted like legacy to mean having as many children as possible. So you have as many opportunities and as many people to like reproduce your genetic material and carry your last name. Now, once again, very strange because that's assuming that the single mothers he had children with will allow their children to take his name. But besides the point, I think his view of legacy is very superficial. And I also think that it's going to be really damaging to his children in the long run because ultimately, they're not going to have the best relationship with their father because the father does not have a good relationship with all of their mothers. I guarantee you, when it's going to come time to pay child support and start to, pay for these children to have the best of the best, the private schools and the tutoring and the extracurricular activities, I think Nick Cannon is going to fall short because he has so many children. He's not that wealthy, y'all. So that's going to cause a huge strain in his relationship with the mothers. One thing I've noticed, and I just want to kind of, as a general statement, say, men like him, I think what they believe legacy is just having children and just populating the Black community with as many people as possible. It seems like in the 1970s, a lot of Black men were really propagating the idea that we can overcome white supremacy through sheer numbers. So having more Black children was like a huge push in the community at the time. And what's interesting is these men don't consider the biggest part about legacy is tradition, values, and achievement. That legacy that you leave behind is the work of what you've done. The accumulation of your work is your legacy. The accumulation of your wealth and your status and your reputation is what you pass down to your children. There's nothing more honorable about having a father who worked really hard, who was known for his sacrifices, and who was known for the quality of his work. You know what I'm saying? And so when you have a man of character as your father and the whole community respects him as such, that legacy gives you shoes to fill in. You step into his shoes and you step into the model that he has created for you. Where Nick Cannon is failing, like a lot of Black men, is that they think legacy is just about last name. They think it's just about having men who look like you or having daughters who look like you. It's not just about that. It's about creating the template for generations to follow behind you. It's about the family stories and the oral history around how great you were and the things that you accomplished in the family's name. It's about, having ties to land. It's about tradition, creating family traditions and honoring that and setting that precedent for your children. That's what legacy is. Legacy is achievement. Legacy is really carving a path for your generation, for your family line. And so, it's really disappointing to see Nick Cannon do all of this because it seems to be motivated by selfishness, right? Like I think Nick Cannon did release a statement saying that he had these kids on purpose. He has like 7 children by multiple different women on purpose. I think maybe his chronic illness has a lot to do with this, but generally speaking, it's selfish. It's motivated by selfishness. So that's one type of Black man, but let's look at a different type of archetype of Black father. So T.I. is another type of archetype. He is the Black man who basically, how men say that you can't turn a hoe into a housewife? Well, you can't turn a horrible dude into a husband. You know what I'm saying? And I think that T.I. is an example of what happens when you take a dude who used to run the streets and used to own the streets. He used to beat a block, as Jay-Z said. And then now he is trying to be a family man. And it's obvious that he's not really cut out for it. Like, it's very obvious that the toxic, masculinity and the misogyny that he has used it to his disadvantage, and it ends up seeping into the lives of his children. I'm sure y'all remember that whole controversy with T.I. and how he basically was policing his daughter's sexuality and was being very invasive of her privacy, even going as far as to go to her gynecologist appointment and confirm that she was really a virgin. That is disrespectful. I don't even think that's really like what doctors are supposed to do. And so it just kind of shows that his toxic patriarchal attitude that affected him and allowed him to run the streets as he did has now made him a terrible and ineffective father to Black daughters. And so I can only wonder what's going to happen to his Black daughter when she grows up. And now that she's of age, how she's going to conduct herself and how she's going to see Black men as a result. I shudder at the thought, And so, like I said, like when it comes to, Black fatherhood, a lot of Black men are forgetting how you rear your children, how you raise your family is your legacy. Your best and most important legacy is not the tangible assets, although that's a role that plays a part. The most important part of your legacy is the model of manhood and fatherhood that you leave behind. And so the model of manhood that he has shown his daughters and he has shown his son is to clap your sons on the back for having as much sex with women as possible and not educating them on the responsibilities of manhood. They're following in their father's footsteps. You get what I'm saying? Like his young son apparently was being very active at a young age, and he had no problem with his son being active. But his daughter, he hated the thought and was policing her sexuality. He's setting a template for manhood at that point, and his sons are going to grow up to be just as toxic as he was, and they're going to probably run the streets just like he is. But let's go even further. Let's talk about how T.I.'s legacy, whatever legacy he could have had, has been completely tainted by his ultra conservative views. Doing a podcast with Alex Jones, the perfect example of this. And to make it even worse, he has also been under fire and might get charges pressed against him and his wife Tiny because of some of the activities that they were partaking in, drugging women and assaulting them. That will be his legacy. His legacy will not be his cute little rap music and his songs that people like. like? No, it will be criminal activity. It will be toxic masculinity, and the wake he will leave behind him will affect his family for generations. So part of this idea of fatherhood should be leaving behind a healthy view of masculinity and setting that as an example for your sons to live by and your daughters to aspire to. And so the fact that he hasn't done that is just so disappointing, but not surprising. After all, he's in a very toxic patriarchal industry that does not treat women very well. So, what do we expect? So what is my point, right? Faith, why are you talking about this? Why are you talking about two pop rappers or two male rappers in the pop culture space? What does that have to do with Black men as a whole? Well, I'll tell you. I think that despite the fact that these are two different types of Black men and they have, their own personal issues, their selfishness and their ego, their entitlement, their misogyny gets in the way of being effective fathers. And it kind of disturbs me because when I see generally the conversations around Black fatherhood on social media, they seem to be more interested in counteracting negative portrayals of Black men as being absent fathers by saying, see, here's this one, this one study, I think it's called Claiming Fatherhood. I think it's Claiming Fatherhood, Race and the Dynamics of Paternal Involvement Among Unmarried Men. So that study was done in 2011. And a lot of Black men refer to this study, I think it was in a political science journal. They are using this to claim that, see, Black men are not all absent fathers. That's a myth, this, that, and the third. And I'm like, here's the problem. That study was not trying to disprove the notion that, Black fathers aren't absent. In fact, if you really look at what the study is saying, you'll notice several things. For one, if we're talking about unmarried men who do not live with their children, of course, it's going to be a lot of men. That's going to be a lot of Black men. Why? Because 70% of Black children have unmarried single mothers as parents, right? The majority of Black children are not raised in two-parent households. So that's going to be a lot of Black men. Second of all, we got to consider that we are at a disproportionate rate of unwed motherhood. In other communities, the standard is to marry the mother of your children. So therefore, it would be really difficult to make the argument that Black men who are unmarried and who have children with single mothers are the same as men of other races who are unmarried and have children with single mothers, because those are two different realities. When Black men are unmarried, for one, oh man, this is going to get me so much hate. For one, a lot of times we need to be honest about the dynamics in the Black community that would allow for this. So the gender disparity, where men can basically do whatever they want because there's so few of them and so few eligible men. And then there's so many women that they're all competing for men and typically sharing men, right? So concurrent relationships where one relationship overlaps with another one and women are basically sharing the same man happens a lot in the Black community. So like that same gender disparity that causes all these problems is not as bad as it is in the Black community in other races. Other races don't seem to have this same issue. I would also say the fact that there's so many Black men in the prison system, in the prison industrial complex, is also a bigger issue. So like, I don't know if other races have it as bad. I will say the Latino population probably, actually. I think the Latino population is probably the only one off the top of my head that I've seen the data for that seem to reflect similar trends. But the point is the Black community has very specific struggles and a combination of factors that lead to why there's so many single Black men in the first place. Now, it's not the total reason, but it is a really good explanation for why there seems to be a deficit of men available in the first place. I mean, hell, some Black men don't even live. A lot of them are unalived at a very young age due to male on male violence in the Black community. So a combination of these factors leads to there being a gender disparity, and that causes all these issues. We don't have that in other communities. So when the default in other communities is to marry the mother of your children and live with your children, of course, the few men who don't live with their kids and are not active in their kids' life are gonna they're going to not be good people. They're not going to take care of their children, right? The few men that don't live with their children, the few men that are not married to the mother of their kids, like, are typically going to be very uninvolved parents, and they're not going to be as good. There's also much fewer of them in their race. In the Black community, we're talking about the majority. So that would mean that there's a lot of men who have their own respective reasons for why they're not married to the mother. Does that make it a good idea? No. But that does mean because there's so many of them, there's probably a whole list of reasons as to why Black men are not married to those Black women and how those relationships came to be. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, I don't know if it's a good idea for Black men to just like say unilaterally, Black men are actually not bad fathers. It's like, no, you're being compared to men who are weekend dads at best. You're not being compared to married fathers who live with their children, because all the studies that I've seen show that men who are married to the mothers and live with their kids are way more active to be very involved parents. So you're not compared to those men. You're compared to the men of other races who don't even live with their kids, are not married to the mother, and are weekend fathers at best. That's who you are compared to, right? So you're getting a participation trophy for being there, not necessarily, and being the best of that group, not necessarily compared to the ones statistically most likely to have been there for their children, live with their children, and whose kids have the best life outcomes. You know what I'm saying? Like, if we look at this from an objective standpoint, part of the reason why Black children don't have good life outcomes is because of the fact that most of us don't come from two-parent households, and we may not even know the father. The father may not even be in the kid's life. So that affects life outcomes because single mothers typically are in poverty, right? So this is not something to rejoice about. In fact, the lack of, how do I describe this? In fact, when we consider that there's so many unwed single mothers in the Black community, that's what keeps the poverty rate so high. We need more Black couples that live with the kids and live with the mother of their children. We need more of that. And we also need more Black folks to get married and stay married. That's what has to happen. That's what will hopefully help these families. 2 incomes, the parents living with the kids to help raise them. I think that will make everything much, much better. But the fact that y'all are seemingly advocating for polygamy, the fact that y'all are seemingly advocating to say marriage is actually just a sheet of paper and that it doesn't matter, is kind of like ridiculous to me. If we all know that we're not going to get a universal basic income type of legislation anytime soon, then no, I'm not going to advocate for there to be more single mothers. It doesn't make sense. I'm not going to sit here and say that marriage is just a sheet of paper and that it doesn't matter. It does. It does matter. Otherwise, more of you would be marrying the mother of your children. If it didn't matter and if it wasn't important, you would be doing it. It matters and it is important, which is why you're avoiding doing it because you understand the responsibility and also the costs. You know what I mean? So clearly marriage does matter. It has a whole lot of weight. So why am I saying all that? I said all this because I want to provide context to Black fatherhood in general. And this is not the slam dunk on Black men as fathers. I think, of course, according to the study, there's a good chunk of you who do seem to be interested in your kids' lives to some degree. And you're not just out here running these streets. A lot of you are not. But that does not mean that your half investment can be compared to those who are fully invested in living with their children. That is not an adequate comparison, and that does not work. You are a weekend father. There are people who literally have no choice but to be in their kids' lives every single day, and they're way more likely to be involved than you. That's just the case. That's just the case. You see what I'm saying? And so I feel like, this goes into a deeper conversation about how sometimes men's selfishness, the selfishness it takes to get women pregnant that you don't want to be with, the selfishness it takes to assume that you should not be put on child support when you literally, that child is literally part of you, the selfishness it takes to make the entire conversation of Black fatherhood around you and your feelings is kind of the problem, right? If Black men really want to make the image of Black manhood stronger, they would consider family life, because family life and legacy is the number one sign of an effective father and a good man. If you're not able to maintain those things, that reflects negatively on you, and that has ripple effects for the rest of your family, generations over. So, you know what I'm saying? I think when it comes to Black fatherhood, I would hope that men understand that just using one study with a small sample size is not going to be enough to repair your image. As Black men, y'all need to have a conversation about what it means to choose the mother of your children, and choose very carefully. What it means to choose very carefully and be very responsible with who you lay down with and who you marry. That should be a huge conversation. And I'm not in black male spaces all the time. So I'm kind of hoping that this is happening. I'm hoping that these conversations are happening, and that men are saying over and over again, be careful who you lay with, wrap it up, do not get random women pregnant. I'm hoping that conversation's happening. It seems like in the mainstream space, in the dominant space, it's not happening. It seems like there seems to be a whole lot of focus on Black single mothers and how much you hate them. And I'm only saying this because literally I'll be on social media and Black women will be saying, how a Black man abused them. And then some Kevin Samuelite in the comments will be like, yeah, but who raised that man? And I'm like, that's not a good response. Like, if a Black man is abusing women, it's because he wants to abuse women. Like, you can't blame your mother your whole life. Where was your father at? You know what I'm saying? Like, you needed two parents. You can blame the parent that was there, but you could also say the parent that should have been there would have probably kept y'all out of poverty and made it much less likely for any of that to happen in the first place. But far be it from me to use logic. I don't know. I think that generally speaking, in the mainstream space, it seems like the conversation is dominated by blaming single mothers just because we were the ones that stayed and we were the ones that were around. It doesn't even factor in that if you want us to believe that Black men play such a huge role in their children's lives, then that's no longer possible. It's no longer possible to solely blame Black single mothers. If you claim you're there, if you claim you're raising your kids, then that's not a good talking point. You don't get to use that as a rebuttal for when Black women are talking about their experiences and how Black men have harmed them. It's not a good rebuttal to pretend like Black fathers aren't there whenever the outcome of that child is not desirable. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a good idea for you to only say that Black mothers are the only ones raising kids whenever it's a Black male child doing something terrible or going to juvie or failing out of school. That's when y'all want to say it's only Black women raising these sons. When the son is gay and he's a Black male, that's when y'all want to say he was influenced by Black women. But any other time, it's Black men are always there for their kids. Black men are the best fathers, and Black men this and Black men that. I'm like, y'all need to pick. Are you there for your kids or are you not? Are you good fathers or are you not? Just be consistent with it at this point. You know what I'm saying? But I've noticed this in my own life. A lot of Black men who are fathers, they'll be, present but absent at best, and then want to take credit for your successes as if they raised you. No, they didn't raise me. A woman raised me. You know what I'm saying? Like, those of us who actually know our fathers and were raised by our fathers and, our parents were married, a lot of us, our dads were just there. You know what I'm saying? And so the moms were the ones who raised us. You don't get to take credit just because you was in the vicinity. That's not how this works. So, I don't know. I guess the last thing I'll say and I'll talk about is really what I experienced, because some of y'all grew up with single mothers. You know what I'm saying? And your dad was in the periphery or he wasn't around. I grew up with a Black father who was married to my mother. And I know for a fact that even the Black men who are married to their baby moms and stuff, and the ones who do live with their kids, y'all still be just as problematic. Like, I know so many Black women who grew up with Black fathers who the fathers are not around. Like, they were there, but they were present but absent. They were paying bills and they came home every night, but they were not active in their kids' lives. And they were not invested in learning about us and taking care of our emotional health. They literally just went to work every day and left our mothers to do all the labor. And so what that shows is a lot of Black men don't understand legacy and lineage. If you did, you would understand that those early memories that your child has of you are so important. You don't get to just take a 5-year long break from being a father just because you're tired of raising kids. Like, You chose to bring that child into the world, right? You chose to have that child. Hopefully you used family planning. So you have to raise that kid, even when it's difficult. You know what I'm saying? And I've noticed too, a lot of Black fathers, a lot of them are using fatherhood, like Nick Cannon, like T.I., to validate their own ego. The second that their baby daughters get a little bit older and they don't worship their fathers the same, y'all act a fool. I've known way too many Black women who come forward and said, yeah, my father and mother were married and I was a daddy's girl when I was a baby and I couldn't talk and I was like 2 years old. But, when I started getting my own opinions and I started becoming older and I could talk and I could reason and think, the relationship with my father shifted because he had to see me as more than just an adoring pet, but as an actual person with their own thoughts and feelings. And he had to take care and manage mine, and he couldn't do it. A lot of Black women have come forward and said this, that with their fathers could not manage their emotions, right? They had to confront their pride and their ego and even their misogyny, because your daughter is not a whore. She's not the person that you're sleeping with, right? She's also not the mother of your children, the Madonna whore complex. Your daughter does not fit into either one of those things. And so you have to figure out, what is your relationship to women that aren't sleeping with you? And how will you navigate that? And a lot of Black men are failing because they see their daughter as someone they can't control. And so they don't know what to do with her. I had that same situation. My father couldn't control me. I wasn't the whore that he was sleeping around with before he met my mom. And I wasn't the Madonna complex, meaning the Madonna, the mother of the child who gives birth to your children that you desexualize. I was none of those things. I was your daughter. And so he had to work on his relationship with women as a byproduct of being my father. And he failed because he could not put aside his ego and his pride to learn how to be a better advocate to women by being my father. And that's so disappointing, but I know a lot of women have had that experience. And so what I would say is, once again, what was his legacy? What was my father's legacy? Did he leave a strong legacy of manhood, of valor, of character and integrity? Was he a pillar in his community? Did he build assets and set his children up for success? Did he provide them a model? No, he didn't. And so his sons, after his death, are left to pick up the pieces and assemble together their version of manhood in that vacuum. Does that make sense? Like in his absence, because now he's passed away, he's no longer alive. My brothers are now grown Black men trying to figure out manhood and trying to figure out fatherhood and put the pieces together to make it make sense. All because he didn't do that work for them. He just set back the next generation and the next 2 generations after. So if you want to break that cycle, Black men have to confront their ego and they have to confront their pride. They have to stop being so selfish and making everything about them. You need to unlearn misogyny, right? So you can better show up for your sons and you can better show up for your daughters. That's how you can be good fathers. That's how you can be a pillar of your community. That's how you can be an example. I don't think every Black man is like T.I. and Nick Cannon, but a lot of dudes are, because you make the same mistakes that they made. Because it's not just about having the money to have 7 different children and getting 3 or 4 different women pregnant. It's about the principle of the thing. It's about the selfishness. It's about the entitlement. It's about the misogyny of a T.I. as a father, right? That's what Black men are missing. And that's what we can do to make manhood better. That's what we can do as a community so that Black men can restore their image and reputation if they so desire. Anyway, I pretty much have said everything I want to say. Thank you for listening to this message. Let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree? Do you think that the selfishness and the entitlement and the misogyny is what's holding Black men back from being better fathers to their children? Let me know in the comment section below, and I will chat with you guys next time. Bye.